in New York City. A bomb detonates in the subway during the morning rush hour, injuring at least 4 people. Down to the wire, Senate candidates Roy Moore and Doug Jones make their final pitches to voters in Alabama ahead of tomorrow's election. Jerusalem fallout. 2 religious leaders in the Middle East will not meet with the vice president when he visits next week. On your mark, get set, ho, ho, ho. A Santa Claus-themed race in Denmark helps raise money. We'll have more on the Reindeer Games. On EWTN News Nightly for Monday, December 11th, 2017.
This was an attempted terrorist attack. Thank God the perpetrator did not achieve his ultimate goals.
A man with a pipe bomb causes an explosion in New York City's subway during the morning rush hour, injuring himself and 3 others. Good evening from Washington, D.C. Thank you to those of you joining us from around the world for news from a Catholic perspective. I'm Lauren Ashburn. New York City's Mayor Bill de Blasio says a result of that attack, police are beefing up security at subway stops across the city. Correspondent Wyatt Goolsby joins us from outside Union Station, a major transportation hub in the nation's capital. Good evening, Wyatt.
Good evening, Lauren. Authorities in Washington are following the developments out of New York City and getting updates from federal law enforcement. Officials here say there is no credible threat to Washington's subway system, but they're looking for riders to be on the lookout for anything unusual after this morning's blast. Authorities say 4 people, including the suspect, are being treated for non-life-threatening injuries tonight. Those injuries caused by a man with a homemade pipe bomb strapped to his body. He set off the device at New York City's Port Authority bus terminal.
As New Yorkers, our lives revolve around the subways. When we hear of an attack in the subway, it's incredibly unsettling.
Mayor de Blasio describing the explosion happened around 7:20 this morning in a long underground passageway under 42nd Street. The blast caused smoke to fill the tunnel, which was packed with commuters.
Thank God our first responders were there so quickly to address the situation to make sure people were safe.
Police say the lone suspect is 27-year-old Akayed Ullah. Officials think he was inspired by ISIS, but does not appear to have any direct contact with the terror group. Everything around the Port Authority area was shut down for a few hours before reopening. Now authorities are searching through Ullah's Brooklyn home for clues. They believe he's originally from Bangladesh. Despite terror threats, Governor Andrew Cuomo says New Yorkers will stand strong.
This is New York. The reality is that we are a target by many who would like to make a statement against democracy, against freedom. We have the Statue of Liberty in our harbor, and that makes us an international target.
New York has seen its share of terror attacks in recent years. On October 31st, a man drove a rented truck into a bike path near the World Trade Center, killing 8 people. Here in D.C., authorities also have to be on alert all the time. Obvious targets include the White House, the monuments, and Congress, which is just a few steps from where I am. Lauren?
Correspondent Wyatt Goolsby reporting from outside Union Station in Washington, D.C. Alabama voters head to the polls tomorrow in a hotly contested Senate race. Republican Roy Moore, dogged by sexual harassment allegations, and Democrat Doug Jones are vying for the seat vacated by Attorney General Jeff Sessions. President Trump is stumping for Moore. Capitol Hill correspondent Jason Calvi has more. Good evening, Jason.
Good evening, Lauren. Alabama is reliably Republican. Donald Trump in 2016 won the state by 28 points. But the latest Fox News poll has Republican Roy Moore down by 10 points. Moore denies the sexual harassment claims against him, including that he molested a 14-year-old girl. But now the firebrand conservative makes one final pro-life push.
In his latest ad, Republican Roy Moore is attacking his opponent's pro-abortion views and promising to defend life. President Trump is in Moore's corner, recording these robocalls with a pitch to Alabama conservatives.
We're building a stronger military and protecting the Second Amendment and our pro-life values. But if Alabama elects liberal Democrat Doug Jones, all of our progress will be stopped cold.
Democrat Doug Jones supports abortion rights. In September, he told MSNBC, "I'm not in favor of anything that is going to infringe on a woman's right and her freedom to choose. Once that baby is born, that's where I become a right-to-lifer." That pro-abortion stance is not enough to push Alabama's senior Republican senator to vote for Roy Moore. Senator Richard Shelby says he's writing in another Republican.
I think so many accusations, so many cuts, so many drip, drip, drip. When it got to the 14-year-old story, that was enough for me. I said, I can't vote for Roy Moore.
Doug Jones is using that to his advantage.
He says that Alabama deserves better than Roy Moore. That's Senator Shelby. That's Senator Shelby, and he said so much more, and he didn't have to.
Roy Moore has been absent from the campaign trail for the past week, but last night he broke his silence, saying firmly in a TV interview the allegations he molested and tried to date teens are false. Lauren?
President Trump isn't the only national figure involved in this race. Former President Obama, who doesn't often weigh in on politics, seems to be tipping the scales, or trying to, by making calls on behalf of Democrat Doug Jones. What is at stake?
Republicans barely have a majority in the Senate with only 52 GOP Senate seats. President Trump and his party say they cannot afford to lose the Alabama seat. Senator Shelby says it'll all come down to tomorrow's voter turnout. And it looks like weather won't get in the way, with no rain or snow expected on Election Day.
Capitol Hill correspondent Jason Calvi, thank you. Continuing fallout from the president's decision to recognize Jerusalem as Israel's capital and plans to move the embassy from Tel Aviv to the Holy City. But U.S. Ambassador to the UN, Nikki Haley, says Americans have wanted the move for decades.
For 22 years, you have had presidents and the American people ask for the embassy to be moved. And no president, not Clinton, not Bush, not Obama, actually had the courage to make that move and listen to the will of the American people.
Ambassador Haley insists the move will help the peace process. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu also praised the announcement. Meanwhile, Vice President Mike Pence will not be meeting with two key religious leaders on his trip to the Middle East next week. Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas has canceled his meeting with Pence after the president's announcement. And the head of Egypt's Coptic Church has also pulled out of a meeting with the vice president over that same decision. Pence will visit Egypt and Israel next week. The Vatican is calling for wisdom and prudence following the Jerusalem recognition. In a statement, the Vatican says, quote, "The Holy See reiterates its own conviction that only a negotiated solution between Israelis and Palestinians can bring a stable and lasting peace." Juliet Lindley is EWTN News Nightly's Vatican correspondent. She joins us from Rome. Juliet, the Pope made reference to the singular character of the Holy City of Jerusalem. What does he mean by that?
Lauren, it's singular because it is such a unique city that is holy for three key religions: Islam, Judaism, and Christianity. So you have the Wailing Wall and the Temple Mount, which are key religious spots for the Jews. For us Christians, we have the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, where Jesus' tomb is, as well as the room where the Last Supper took place. And then you have the Dome of the Rock, which is one of Islam's most religious spots.
Remind us, what is the Holy See's official position on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict?
So the Holy See has instituted full diplomatic ties with Israel since 1994. Whereas in 2015, it recognized Palestine as a sovereign state. Now, it constantly insists that a peaceful, lasting solution can only be reached through negotiation and within internationally recognized borders.
As Vice President Pence is visiting the Middle East next week, several religious leaders are pulling out of meetings with him. What is the view of Christian leaders in Jerusalem?
Yes, so the key Christian leaders in the Holy Land wrote a letter to President Trump appealing to him to rethink his move on Jerusalem, to rethink his decision to recognize Jerusalem as the Israeli capital and to move the U.S. embassy from Tel Aviv to Israel. Now, they said that it would mean increased conflict, violence, hatred, and they called on him to, quote, walk towards more love and a more definitive peace by continuing to recognize the international status of Jerusalem. Now, the letter was signed by all of the City of Jerusalem's major church figures, including the Greek Orthodox Patriarch Theophilus III, as well as the Roman Catholic Apostolic Administrator Archbishop Pierbattista Pizzaballa.
Juliet Lindley, EWTN News Nightly Vatican correspondent from on top of a very windy roof. We'll talk to you soon.
Thank you, Lauren.
President Vladimir Putin announces a major withdrawal of Russian troops from Syria. During a surprise visit Monday to the country, Putin says Russian soldiers, along with the Syrian army, have defeated ISIS in the region. And he adds they have, quote, made the motherland proud. It was the first visit by a head of state to war-torn Syria since 2011. A senior UN official who spent 4 days in North Korea last week says time is of the essence to avoid war. Jeffrey Feltman, a political affairs chief, adds the current situation is the most tense and dangerous peace and security issue in the world. He was the first top United Nations official to visit the country in 6 years. Days after Iraq declares victory over ISIS, Christians in the country return to an ancient monastery for a celebration. The Feast of Mar Benim took place Sunday in a 4th century monastery that houses the relics of Saint Benim. The holy place is being rebuilt after it was destroyed by ISIS in 2015. Hundreds took part in the outdoor service. Coming up, legal defeat. A court rules against the Archdiocese of Washington, D.C. We'll update you on the case.
Perché tante volte noi siamo attaccati al negativo.
Pope Francis says we must leave behind our grudges and complaints and let the Lord console us. During his morning homily, the Pope encouraged us to instead ask God to help us stay positive. A federal judge rules the Washington, D.C. Metro does not have to post Christmas ads submitted by the Archdiocese. The Advent ads picture a creche and urge people to find the perfect gift. The Archdiocese says, quote, we will continue in the coming days to pursue and defend our right to share the important message of Christmas in the public square. The Pentagon says it will allow transgender people to enlist in the military beginning January 1st. That's despite President Trump's opposition. The president tweeted in July he was banning transgender enrollment. 2 federal courts already have ruled against the ban. Potential transgender recruits will have to overcome a lengthy and strict set of physical, medical, and mental condition to join the armed services. Joining me now to discuss this and other political news is Bob Cusack, editor-in-chief of The Hill. Great to have you back.
Hey, Lauren.
2 courts, now the Pentagon, are bucking the President of the United States. Can the Pentagon disregard his directive? Isn't he the commander-in-chief?
He is, and this is an interesting question, and of course this doesn't come up very often. And remember, when President Trump first announced this, the Pentagon was caught flat-footed. They didn't know what was going on. They had no implementation plans. So I think it depends on if Trump really wants this policy and how hard he'll fight for it, because I just can't remember another situation like this.
But you know, he doesn't have to fight. He's the commander.
Right. He can instruct them. That's yes. So if he feels that strongly, because we know Trump has changed positions from time to time, he could tell Mattis, no, you got to follow my orders.
All right, let's go back to Alabama. We heard earlier in the show that this special Senate election tomorrow is highly contentious. Roy Moore has been accused of sexual allegations. Now, I've seen lots of polling around this. Fox News poll has Doug Jones with a 10-point lead over Roy Moore, but Moore seems to have a lot of support. So what does he need to win this race?
I think what Moore and his supporters have been doing, and the party that supports Moore, have been really making this race about abortion, because Doug Jones does not is pro-choice. So overall, I think that's a very good strategy. Trump, I mean, there are going to be a lot of people who vote for Moore because they like him. I think there are a lot of people who will vote for Moore, but they won't tell a pollster they'll vote for Moore. I think Moore is the slight favorite here, but I think polling in Alabama has been, as you said, all of them. You don't know. It's really hard to predict.
has him up.
Has Moore up by a couple points. Yeah.
So it's sort of like the presidential election where you don't know what's going to happen.
No.
Right. We've been following the vice president's upcoming trip to the Middle East over the weekend. It was announced that that Mahmoud Abbas, the Palestinian president, will not meet with the vice president. And there are others who won't, as we've reported. But it's because of President Trump's decision to move the embassy to Jerusalem.
Right.
So how is this going to impact the political peace process?
Well, it doesn't help, but at the same time, even before this, presidents, including President Obama and others, have tried to get a peace process going and agreed to. And Trump is doing it differently. And there hasn't been the widespread violence that had been predicted. There have been some protests. But I think that the Palestinians almost had to do this just as a symbol.
All right. Thank you so much. I wish we had time to talk about a lot more of these topics. Bob Cusack, Editor-in-Chief for The Hill.
Thanks, Lauren.
Up next, naughty and nice business style. We'll talk about a recent study highlighting the stores that use Christmas and those that don't. Plus, reindeer games. An unusual race in Denmark brings the Christmas spirit to life. U.S. bishops encourage the faithful to celebrate tomorrow's Feast of Our Lady of Guadalupe as a day of solidarity with immigrants. The bishops say they will honor Our Lady while also recognizing the accomplishments, hopes, and fears of those who, quote, came to the U.S. seeking a better life. For more on this story, plus an article on the refugee crisis in the Democratic Republic of Congo, visit CatholicNewsAgency.com. A new report shows a pair of national rival chain pharmacies at odds over Christmas. CVS uses the term Christmas in its advertising and products. Rite Aid does not. Those are among the findings of the Liberty Council's naughty and nice retail list. It analyzes which companies use the term Christmas and which do not. Among the naughty, you can see it here, J. Crew, Rite Aid Pharmacy, and TJ Maxx. The nice, Hallmark, CVS, and the Home Depot. We're joined by Jay Richards, assistant professor in the School of Business and Economics at the Catholic University of America. He's also host of Force for Good right here on our network. Welcome back.
Thanks, Lauren. Good to be with you.
From a Catholic perspective, let's talk about this naughty and nice list that has come out. The gap is on the naughty list because there are no references to Christmas. And I think that's the problem with a lot of the companies on here. So since Jesus is the reason for the season, the birth of Jesus, why does the retail industry leave out Christmas?
I think, honestly, Lauren, part of it is a kind of self-censorship. The reality is that companies have an economic motivation to talk about Christmas. The vast majority of Americans celebrate it. They're buying presents. And so I really think a lot of this is self-censorship and not actual hostility. But the fact that they have an economic motive and know that, if there's literally no reference to Christmas, I think that has to be intentional.
Okay, but I don't understand. Why would they self-censor?
I think they imagine that their customer base or their constituency is going to be offended, which is absurd. There's almost no place in the country is anyone going to be offended by this. And so I think there's a little of that. And I think in some cases, it's actually at the corporate level. There's just simply discomfort with religious things.
So as a Catholic, should I shop only at the nice list?
That's a tough question. I mean, so do we punish the bad guys for doing this? I think the best thing to do is to make your opinion known. Thank the companies that do this, like Hobby Lobby. They're a Christian company. They're on the nice list. Reward them with that, and then say something to the companies that don't, that you actually noticed it.
Right. So the others that we haven't mentioned, Bath & Body Works, Beals, Belk, Best Buy, Bronner's, ChristmasPlace.com, all of those are ones that you could talk about on social media.
Yes, absolutely.
And that you could actually patronize this
That's
Christmas.
exactly right. And I mean, the funny thing about this, Lauren, is that the fact that Christmas is a public reality is itself a reflection of the influence of Catholics on the culture, but it happened 150 years ago. And so now we're just sort of living off the interest of that. And so, you know, it's a problem to over-commercialize it, but on the other hand, we should be glad when companies actually foreground this.
What do you mean 150 years ago?
It was only about 150 years ago that Christmas became a public event. If you look at
commercialized holiday.
Or really anything. It was not a commercial and federal holiday until 1870. And if you talk to the Puritans in the 1600s, none of them celebrated Christmas or any feasts on the liturgical calendar. Remember, Christmas is short for, that's Christ Mass. The fact that Christmas is a public and now almost secular event is itself evidence of the shaping of American culture by the church over the last century and a half.
Fascinating information, Jay. It's always great to talk to you about business and Catholic social teaching. Thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure, Lauren.
Jay Richards, host of EWTN's A Force for Good. Finally tonight, Santa comes early for one town in Denmark and brings a lot of lookalikes. Hundreds of people dressed up as Santa took part in a run Sunday south of Copenhagen. It was organized by a charity to raise money for more than 500 families in need. Money will be spent on food and presents for the children. After the run, a traditional rice porridge was served. Okay, you had me until you said rice porridge. Then I'm out. For all of us here at EWTN News Nightly, to all of you around the world, thank you for watching. I'm Lauren Ashburn. We'll be back tomorrow with more news from a Catholic perspective. Good night, and God bless you.